Welcome to Translating Interview Speak, what your interviewer really wants to know. We want to welcome you here. We're Barbara Limmer and Laura Brown, and we have a lot of experience with interviewing. We had many years where we interviewed other people, years where we trained interviewers so they knew what to say and what to ask, and we've also coached many people that were applying for jobs and helped them to really understand what are the questions behind the questions so they can have the most successful and least stressful interviews. We wrote the book together, Interview Speak, What Your Interviewer Really Wants to Know. And today we're going to start to share some of that information. Let me ask you this. Have you ever left an interview and thought you absolutely nailed it, but then you didn't get the job? And often people don't really know what the interviewers are looking for. This book, Translate the Interview Speak, so you can really understand what they're looking for and give them what they need so you can get the job that you want. In these videos, you'll learn 5 different parts from the book. The first part we're going to talk about is preparation and how key that is to have the best interviews possible. Then we're going to talk about translations, where you're actually going to translate what the interviewers are really asking so you know how to answer the right question. Part 3, we're going to talk about mistakes and how to avoid them. Part 4, we're going to talk about different stages of the interview process. And part 5, we're going to wrap it all up so you know what to do next. So let's talk about what makes interview questions so hard. Well, first of all, this is a really stressful time. You know you've only got about half an hour or 45 minutes, and there's a lot of pressure on you to do your best. Also, each question has a question behind it. There's something that the interviewers are really looking for, and you really need to translate what they're saying so you can answer the real question and give your best answers for that. Also, there are no perfect answers, and a lot of other groups will tell you, here's the right answer to this question. And we want to tell you, no, there is no one right answer because interviewers, when they hear that quote, right answer, will think, okay, this person isn't being real with me. Instead, we want to help you find your best answer to these questions. Another thing that causes problems when you're in an interview is if you've interviewed other people and you might think, oh, I know how this works, but every interviewer is different, and we're going to talk about how to deal with different kinds of interviewers. Also, it can be hard to know how you're doing because maybe the person has a poker face or maybe the person is smiling a lot. But either way, you might be doing well, you might not be, but it's hard, and that makes it even more stressful in the interview. Now, before we get started, I want to talk about 3 things that employers want to know because this is really the basis for what we're talking about for interviews. First, they want to know, can you do the job? Well, obviously, that's why they're looking at your resume and that's why they're going to ask you questions about it. But the second part is something that a lot of people miss, and this is really important. They want to know, will you do the job? Does this suit your interests? Are you motivated? Does this connect with your career goals? So they want to know, are you excited and motivated to do this job? And you might think, well, obviously I'm in the interview, but they know you want a job. Do you want this job? And that's why we're going to talk about how to tailor some of your answers to make sure they connect to this job. So you show the interviewer you want this one. The third part is, will you fit? Do you have the kind of personality and work style that will be a match for our team, department, company, and customers? And they'll be asking you questions about, tell me about a time that you worked with a team or times you had conflicts. Because again, they're trying to find out, will you fit? Because here's the bottom line. If they hire you, they don't want to fill the role again in a couple of months. So actually, interviewers are scared. They're nervous that if they move you forward or they hire you, you might quit or you might not do a good job. So when you think about answering, you need to think about, how can I really help the interviewer understand that I will do a great job going forward? Now we're going to talk a lot about preparation. A couple of quick things about preparing. Get to know the company, obviously. Go to their website, social media. How do they describe their culture? How do they describe their leadership? What words do they use? Get to know the interviewer. Look at their LinkedIn profile. What are they posting recently? Get to know the job. You've got the job description, so really analyze it. And we'll talk about how to develop possible questions based on that. Then know yourself. Identify relevant and compelling stories that you'll be ready with. So when they ask you questions, you can pull these stories out, and prepare for common questions. And we're going to go through a lot of common questions and talk about how you should answer and things that you shouldn't say. Now I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Well, let's talk about different kinds of questions that you could be asked. And these are some concepts I want to go over. The first is what I call breadth versus depth. A breadth question is asking about the breadth of your career. So those sound something like describe your experience in this, or describe your experience doing that. You're not to give a specific example because if you only give one example, that's selling the breadth, that's underselling the breadth of your experience. Depth, however, is when they want you to go deep in one specific situation. So those start with things like give me an example of this, describe a situation when this happened. So that's breadth versus depth. Another very common type of interview question is actually known by two different things, either behavioral or competency based questions. And those refer to the same thing. And that's when they want a specific example, again, showing the depth of your experience. So tell me about a time when this happened. Give me an example of this. Describe for me when this occurred. That's how you know to give a specific example. Some interviewers also ask hypothetical questions. So those start with, how would you handle this kind of situation? A general question is, how do you handle this kind of situation? Now, I'm here to tell you, if you get asked a hypothetical or a general, you can transfer that and give a specific example, which will always have more impact than talking about a blue sky hypothetical or in general how you typically handle something. So even if you're asked, how would you handle it or how do you handle it? That translates to you as, okay, if I'm going to put my best foot forward, I want to give a specific example. And you can give sort of a connector there by saying, rather than describe a hypothetical, I think the best way for me to answer that would be to give you a specific example. Or, how do you handle this? You could say, I actually do that quite a bit. What I'd like to do is talk you through the last time that actually happened to me. Because when you give real live situations with real actions and real results, your answer will always have more impact. So, if you are asked for a specific example, how do you avoid just rambling on and on? Well, the best thing to do is to use a framework to give your answer structure. And these are the most common ones. Problem, action, result is the easiest to remember. We call that PAR. The one that has been around for a very long time, even going back to the 80s, is STAR, situation, task, action, result. Amazon is actually known for using that framework. My favorite, however, is SOAR, situation, obstacle, action, result. And the reason I like that is because you're showing a lot more impact by describing the obstacles you faced in that situation as opposed to just glossing over here was the task at hand, like the STAR framework. So let's give an example next. So for SOAR, here's what that would sound like. At my last company, there was a problem with X. That's the situation. It was a problem because of Y, and what made it difficult was Z. That's where you're describing the obstacle and you're allowing the interviewer to really feel the pain, so to speak, of what you were going through. The actions I took were A, B, and C, and as a result of that, there was this quantified result whenever possible. So that's how you would use the SOAR framework. Here are some tips and traps to avoid. And you might think that these go without saying, but I can't even tell you how many times I've heard these things, and people fall into these traps without even realizing it. So the first one is called weakening words and phrases. And this is people who are trying to be humble and they say, I try to do this or I'm pretty good at that. Guess what? A job interview is not the time to be humble. So avoid weakening words and phrases. Filler words like and also weaken your answer. And by the way, if you need some time to think, it's okay to pause. It's better to be silent and allow your brain to work and think as opposed to using those filler words like and. Another trap is giving a generic answer. And as Laura was mentioning earlier, there are books that say, oh, here's the answer you should give. Well, guess what? If you're not customizing the answer to fit this particular job and that particular company, your answer will have much less impact and you will not be differentiating yourself from all of the other candidates. So definitely customize your answer to fit that job and that company. Now, we often get asked, how long should our answers be? Well, 1 to 2 minutes, really no longer than 2 minutes. Some questions, as you'll hear next, should really be closer to 1 minute. And if you are telling a story or giving an example, 1 minute is often not enough, but do not go beyond 2 minutes because you're just going to lose your interviewer and their mind is going to start wandering and they're going to stop really listening to you. Here's another concept that I want to share. It's called the negative sandwich. When do you use this? Well, what has become quite common is for people to ask what I call negative questions like, tell me about a problem you were unable to solve. Tell me about one of your failures. Tell me about a weakness of yours. So, how do you answer that? Well, you sandwich your negative between two positives. So that would sound something like this. If asked about a failure or a problem you're unable to solve or a weakness, I'm really proud of my ability to do this. That's starting on the positive. However, one time I did this. That's the negative. And then you end on the positive. I learned a very important lesson, and now what I do is this. The next concept is what I call I versus we. This is a trap people fall into because, there's no I in team at most companies. And so every pronoun out of your mouth is we. Well, guess what? In a job interview, if everything you say is we, your interviewer will not know what they're getting when they hire you. So get comfortable with the I word. You want to use both, but be intentional. If it truly was something only you did, say that. I presented to the management team, or we got together as a team and worked on this. So be intentional in your use of both I and we. Define the I before using we. So if you are talking about what you as a team accomplished, say what your part of the team was. I led the team and together we did this, we did that, we got this result. Or I represented my department on the X team and we did this. That way, your interviewer will know what your personal contribution to that team was. And don't overuse either, because you know what? If every word out of your mouth is I, they might wonder how much of a team player are you. But on the other hand, if everything is we, they're not going to know what your personal contribution was.
So that's wrapping up chapter 1. And we wanted to give you some key ideas from that chapter. So let's talk about what's next. Chapter 2 covers common questions and special situations. And so we're going to help you to answer questions like, tell me about yourself, which is a key one because that's what most people get asked at the beginning of an interview. Then questions like, what are your weaknesses? Why should we hire you? And what questions do you have? So we'll be covering that in the next video. Just a reminder that if you haven't already gotten the Interview Speak book, you can get it now at our publisher, Manning.com, with a 40% discount by using Interview Help. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you at the next video. Bye.